The year is 1821. Europe is collectively nursing a hangover from the Napoleonic Wars. It's a continent desperate for a new hobby, something a little more inspiring than redrawing maps and arguing about who gets which bit of Poland. And right on cue, a cause appears, gift-wrapped in classical mythology and historical importance. The Greeks, the actual descendants of Plato and Pericles, or so the marketing went, were rising up against the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, they'd been a province in someone else's empire, and now they wanted out. To the Romantics of Europe, this wasn't a messy regional conflict. This was the ultimate sequel, Democracy Strikes Back. It was a chance for a generation of bored young men, raised on tales of Thermopylae, to finally do something heroic. Or at least to fund it from their comfortable London drawing rooms. The brochure for the Greek Revolution was fantastic. It promised noble scholars fighting for liberty. The reality on the ground was, shall we say, a bit different. The initial fighting forces weren't philosophers in togas. They were klefts, mountain bandits, and highwaymen who had spent generations perfecting the art of raiding Ottoman tax collectors and each other. They were joined by local warlords, ship captains who were basically pirates, and priests who were very good at fiery sermons. These groups were fiercely independent, loyal to their own clans, and viewed cooperation as a temporary inconvenience. They agreed on one thing. They disagreed on pretty much everything else, including who should be in charge, how to distribute loot, and whether to fight the enemy or settle a decades-old family feud first. Every good 19th century revolution needed a secret society, and Greece had the Philhellenism, the Society of Friends. It sounds quite pleasant, doesn't it? It was founded not in Athens, but in Odessa in 1814 by 3 Greek merchants who decided to launch a revolution like one might launch a new shipping venture. Their recruitment methods were cloaked in Masonic-style rituals with secret passwords and death oaths, which was very on brand for the era. Their grand plan was ambitious, and their first choice for a leader was Ioannis Kapodistrias, the foreign minister of Russia. A sensible choice, except he took one look at their half-baked plan and said, and I'm paraphrasing, "Are you insane? No thank you." So they went with their second choice, a high-ranking Russian officer with a flair for the dramatic. That second choice was Alexandros Ypsilantis. In March 1821, he led a small force across the Prut River into the Ottoman-controlled Danubian principalities, modern-day Romania. This was supposed to be the spark. Ypsilantis issued a grand proclamation, talking about Leonidas and fighting tyranny. He fully expected 2 things to happen. The local Christian population would rise up, and his former employer, the Tsar of Russia, would send the cavalry. Neither happened. The locals were not interested in being the opening act for a Greek revolution, and the Tsar promptly disavowed him. His campaign collapsed into a series of embarrassing defeats, ending in a pathetic retreat. It was a complete disaster, but a wonderfully romantic one. A heroic failure is, after all, much better for poetry than a cautious success. While Ypsilantis was failing spectacularly up north, the revolution in southern Greece, the Peloponnese, actually caught fire. And it was horrifyingly brutal. The uprising here wasn't about lofty ideals. It was centuries of resentment exploding at once. When the fortress city of Tripolitsa, the Ottoman administrative center, fell to the Greeks in October 1821, what followed was not a celebration of liberty. It was a 3-day massacre of the city's Turkish and Jewish inhabitants. thousands were killed. This wasn't a sanitized noble war fought by gentlemen. It was a cycle of atrocity and reprisal. The Ottomans responded with their own massacres, most infamously on the island of Chios. This was the ugly engine of the war, a far cry from the poems being written about it in Paris and London. The news of Greek suffering, particularly the Chios massacre, was fantastic PR. It solidified the narrative of Christian martyrs, and the money and volunteers started to flow. Enter the war's biggest celebrity, Lord Byron. He was the rock star of his day, famous, scandalous, and broodingly poetic. He arrived in Greece in 1823, chartered his own ship, and brought a personal contingent of soldiers, along with a custom-made Greek helmet based on an ancient design, because branding is everything. He quickly discovered the Greek factions were more interested in fighting each other for his money than in fighting the Ottomans. Byron spent most of his time trying to broker peace between warlords before dying, not in a blaze of glory, but from a fever in the swampy town of Missolonghi. His death made him the ultimate martyr for the cause, turning a messy reality into a legendary sacrifice. By 1825, the Sultan was getting tired of this whole affair. His own forces couldn't seem to crush the rebellion, so he did what any struggling empire does. He called for help from his most ambitious and technically still loyal vassal. He asked Muhammad Ali of Egypt for his army. In return, he promised him Crete and the Peloponnese. Muhammad Ali's son, Ibrahim Pasha, landed with a modern, European-trained army that was disciplined, organized, and terrifyingly effective. They swept through the Greek heartlands. They retook fortresses, burned villages, and operated with a ruthless efficiency the Greeks couldn't match. The Second Siege of Missolonghi became a symbol of this brutality. The starving defenders, seeing no hope, blew themselves up rather than surrender. For the Greek cause, this was the darkest hour. It looked like the revolution was about to be extinguished permanently. Just when all seemed lost, the great powers of Europe, Britain, France, and Russia finally decided to get off the fence. Their motives were, naturally, a pure and selfless love for freedom. And also, Russia wanted to expand its influence in the Balkans, Britain wanted to secure its Mediterranean trade routes and prevent Russia from getting too powerful, and France wanted to regain some international prestige. It was a geopolitical three-way tug-of-war. Public opinion, whipped into a frenzy by Philhellenic committees and tales of suffering, also played a huge role. It became politically inconvenient to just sit back and watch the cradle of democracy be crushed. So, in the Treaty of London in 1827, they agreed to politely intervene and demand an armistice. They sent a combined fleet to Greece to just, observe things. Peacefully. This combined European fleet sailed into Navarino Bay in October 1827, where the entire Ottoman Egyptian fleet was anchored. The plan was not to start a battle. The plan was a show of force, a naval blockade to enforce the armistice. The Allied commanders were under strict orders to avoid a fight. But when you park 3 massive fleets in one small bay, tensions tend to be high. Someone, somewhere, fired a shot. It might have been a nervous Ottoman cannoneer or a twitchy British frigate captain. We'll never know. What we do know is that it triggered a full-blown, point-blank naval battle. Within a few hours, the entire Ottoman Egyptian fleet was obliterated. Over 60 ships sunk, 6,000 men killed. The Allies lost 0 ships. The admiral famously described it as an untoward event. It was the most untoward event to ever single-handedly secure a country's independence. With their navy at the bottom of the sea, the Ottomans had no choice but to concede. Greece was finally going to be independent, a victory for self-determination. Except the great powers, having saved Greece, now felt they owned it. A republic, they decided, was far too revolutionary and unpredictable. Remember France? We're not doing that again. So they went shopping for a monarch. After some searching, they settled on a 17-year-old Bavarian prince, Otto, who had no connection to Greece whatsoever. In 1832, he was installed as King Otto of Greece. The nation that fought a brutal, decade-long war for the right to govern itself was handed over to a German teenager chosen by a committee of British, French, and Russian diplomats. It is perhaps the most perfectly ironic conclusion to a war started in the name of ancient Athenian democracy. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!